On May 31st, 1970, Gloria Steinem was asked to speak at the Vassar Liberal College in Poughkeepsie, New York. By the mid-70s, Gloria Steinem was nationally known as the spokeswoman and one of the major leaders of the women's liberation movement.
You may be surprised that I'm a commencement speaker. You can possibly be as surprised as I am. In my experience, commencement speakers are gray-haired, respected creatures, heavy with the experience of power in the world and with establishment honors, which means, of course, that they are almost always men.
Gloria Steinem points out the fact that most commencement speakers are almost always men, and that's the complete opposite of herself. She makes the argument that women are never the ones to be held with high esteem.
But this is the year of women's liberation, or at least it's the year the press has discovered a movement that has been strong for several years now and reported as a small, privileged, rather lunatic event, instead of the major revolution in consciousness, in everyone's consciousness, male or female, that I believe it truly is.
At this time, the women's liberation movement was really opening people's eyes and getting media attention. Also, Gloria Steinem was seen as the leading feminist of her time.
The important thing is that we are spending this time together, considering the larger implications of a movement that some call feminist, but should more accurately be called humanist, a movement that is an integral part of rescuing this country from its old, expensive patterns of elitism, racism, and violence.
Steinem states that calling this a feminist movement really doesn't make any sense, because labeling something so narrow-minded as that doesn't show the bigger picture. The only reason that the women's liberation movement is even heard of is thanks to the media, finally discovering this movement that has long been in motion. Gloria Steinem states that the press reports the movement as a small, privileged, rather lunatic event. The fact is that the movement was a lot bigger than most people expected.
The first problem for all of us, men and women, is not to learn, but to unlearn. Patriotism means obedience, age means wisdom, woman means submission, black means inferior. These are preconceptions embedded so deeply in our thinking that we honestly may not know that they are there. Unfortunately, authorities who write textbooks are sometimes subject to that same popular wisdom as the rest of us. Clearly, our minds and government policies of outdated myths is proving to be least difficult, but it is also inevitable. The old assumptions just don't work anymore.
Steinem brings to our realization that society has grained into our minds these warped notions that we need to unlearn, but that's easier said than done.
Our histories, for instance, have generally been written for and about white men. Most of us learn more about any one European country than we did about Africa and Asia combined. The truth is that we need women's studies almost as much as we need black studies, and for exactly the same reason. Too many of us have been allowed from a good education, believing that everything from political power to scientific discovery was the province of white males. We believed, for instance, that the vote had been given to women in some whimsical, benevolent fashion. We never learned about the long desperation of women's struggle or about the strength and wisdom of the women who led it. We heard about the men who risked their lives in the abolitionist movement, but seldom about the women, even though women, as in many movements of social reform, had played the major role. We knew a great deal more about the outdated male supremacist theories of Sigmund Freud than we did about societies in which women had equal responsibility or even ruled. Anonymous, Virginia Woolf once said sadly, was a woman. As Margaret Mead has noted, the only women allowed to be dominant and respectable at the same time are widows. You have to do what society wants you to do, have a husband who dies, and then have power thrust upon you through no fault of your own. The whole thing seems very hard on the men.
In history, the struggles of women have been merely glanced over, while the struggles men have faced have gotten award-winning novels.
Before we go on to other reasons why women's liberation is man's liberation too, and why this incarnation of the women's movement is inseparable from the larger revolution, perhaps we should clear the air of a few more myths. The myth that women are biologically inferior, for instance. Women live longer than men. That's always been cited as proof that we work them to death, but the truth is women live longer than men, even when groups being studied are monks and nuns. Men's hunting activities are forever being pointed to as proof of tribal superiority, but while they were out hunting, women built houses, tilled the fields, developed animal husbandry, and perfected language. Men, isolated from each other out there in the bush, often developed into creatures that were fleet of foot but not very bright. I don't want to prove the superiority of one sex to another. That would only be repeating a male mistake. The truth is that we're just not sure how many of our differences are biological and how many are societal. What we do know is that the differences between the two sexes, like the differences between races, are much less great than the differences to be found within each group. A second myth is that women are already being treated equally in this society. We ourselves have been guilty of perpetuating this myth, especially at upper economic levels, where women have grown fond of being lavishly maintained as ornaments and children. The chains may be made of milk and wall-to-wall carpeting, but they are still chains. Probably the ultimate myth is that children must have full-time mothers, and that liberated women make bad ones. The truth is that most American children seem to be suffering from too much mother and too little father. With laws that permit women equal work and equal pay, men will be relieved of the role as sole breadwinner and stranger to his own children. No more wives who fall apart with the first wrinkle because they've been taught their total identity depends on their outsides. No more responsibility for another adult human being who has never been told she is responsible for her own life and who sooner or later comes up with some version of, "If I hadn't married you, I could have been a star." Women's liberation really is men's liberation too. Women have a special opportunity to live the revolution. By refusing to play their traditional role, they upset and displace the social structure around them. We may be subject to ridicule and suppression, just as men were when they refused to play their traditional role by going to war, but these refusals together are a hope for peace. The challenge of all of us, and to you men and women graduating today, is to live a revolution, not to die for one. Because the truth is, none of us can be liberated if other groups are not. Women's liberation is a bridge between black and white women, but also between the construction workers and the suburbanites, between Nixon's silent majority and the young people they hate and fear. Women are sisters. They have many of the same problems, and they can communicate with each other. The women's movement is an important revolutionary bridge, and we are building it. I know it's traditional on such an occasion to talk about entering the world, but this is an untraditional generation. You have made the campus part of the world. I thank you for it.